Welcome back into another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is not Alan Saunders. Sometimes, just like in football, you got to call an audible. We got Nick Farabaugh joining us today. As everybody can tell, look at your calendar. We're getting pretty close to back to school. Alan's got children. Bam. Some things
Boom.
come up.
Perfect
So
storm.
Nick Farabaugh is here with me for the show. If you guys are wondering, I promised that on a Friday I would wear a cowboy hat. Here we are. The issue with this is the headphones don't go over it, and I can't find my AirPods anywhere. So I made a promise. I'm keeping the promise, but this is very uncomfortable for me right now. I'm very happy to still be here on a Friday, though. Nick, not anything really to touch on new today, right? With training camp wrapping up yesterday in a preseason game tomorrow. Let's take a step back before we take a step forward. Your article today, actually, on the site was about 5 winners, 5 losers of training camp. Without going incredibly depth into that, because we obviously want people to go to the site and read the article. If you want to throw maybe a name or two from that out there, and then obviously kind of tease what's in that article.
We'll do that. Here for the next man up mentality. Here we're embracing that with Alan now, and you know, you we have a tradition here at Steelers now that we hit the ground running, and so I'm going to hit the ground running here. George Pickens, I think, is the obvious winner that we all will name, right? The flashy one
Mhm.
hand catches. You guys see them all on whatever platform you wish to use. You probably can see them on MySpace somehow, even now. But TikTok, Twitter, they're everywhere. Sorry, X, I guess, but I'm not.
Mhm.
I'm not calling it X for like at least 5 years.
Yeah.
So that it's all over the place. But that's not why he just is on the winners list. He looks better in terms of route running. He's running a fuller route tree. He looks like a better player. I think that's the big thing. He's making the spectacular catches along with different routine things. In terms of losers, I think the obvious loser is Kendrick Green.
Mm.
Unfortunately, the fullback experiment's really fun. I like it too. He's actually been quite good at fullback, but man, he hasn't been good at camp, and that Tampa Bay tape is rough, like
Yes.
really bad. And so I don't know how I can have him as anything else but a loser. But there is a lot more there. I'll say that there are many big contributors, including a potential big quarterback on that list. Which one, and then if winner or loser, you kind of have to see. But I did break it down in depth as to why. I talked more about George Pickens over there as well, just kind of the routes he specifically is running, like more in breaking
Mhm.
and out breaking routes. He's just doing more like nuanced things, and I think that's kind of what's going to take him to the next level. I think he should be a guy that really ascends the star status.
Just taking a look big picture here, the entire scope of training camp. What were some of your takeaways? Now, I'm not asking you to give like winners or losers at this point, but just like some takeaways from camp. I know a big thing that everybody talked about, man, no fights. Like that was a big takeaway for me. Not a single fight happening. While it looked like Joey Porter Jr. and George Pickens could have come to blows a couple times, it stayed between the lines and it never went beyond the play. So I think that it's in a tribute to the coaching staff, having them run a very physical practice, but leaving it at that. But what were some of your big takeaways from this camp?
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways was that there is a legitimate willingness to try and push the ball down the field. I think that's been
Mm.
the biggest one I've had is that, yeah, they want to run the football. We all know that, but they're going to try and push the ball down the field. They have guys that can do it. They have George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Calvin Austin, obviously, just adds a different element to what they bring with his speed. But like they have a willingness, and Kenny Pickett's look good doing it. I think Kenny Pickett doesn't have like an elite deep ball, but it's a good enough deep ball, and it's going to give his receivers a chance to win that every single time. If they have separation, he'll get it to them accurately without them having to slow down or severely underthrowing the ball. I think that's been something. So last year, they actually were the worst in the NFL in terms of touchdowns outside the red zone. They only had 2 touchdowns outside the red zone. Both of those
Mhm.
came late in the season. One came in the very last game with George Pickens catching one. So that's something that they need to improve on. It's pretty obvious, I think, that kind of everybody that they needed to get more explosive. I think that there's definitely a possibility for that. I think the offense has shown an ability to look better. I don't know if I'm going to say they're going to be a good offense. I think that's a little bit too much of a.
Yeah.
I still have many doubts about Matt Canada. I still have doubts about this offensive line being like super good. I think it's going to be pretty average. I think the receivers are pretty volatile. I like Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, but where they have been known in their career so far, Pickens was a volatile player. Deontay certainly is being a volatile play before. But this could be a good offense if they click correctly. I think they should be a more explosive offense. And Calvin Austin, I think, is a big part of that equation. I think that's another big takeaway. It's just he's going to have a role in this team. And it's going to be, when a guy runs a 4-3 and can stretch the field horizontally and vertically and do different things that Calvin does from outside, inside. Like, he doesn't have to be a guy that plays more than 15 snaps per game, but you could take 2 or 3 deep shots, 2 jet sweeps, and one of those could be a 50-yard touchdown. Like, that's the point of Calvin Austin in the offense. They didn't have that last year. They will this year. I think another takeaway, and then kind of the big defensive takeaway I had, is just how deep they are at defensive line. Like, I think coming into this, we kind of knew the top was going to be good. Like, we knew who TJ, Alex Highsmith were, Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi, right? But the D-line depth interior-wise is really good. Isaiah Loudermilk had a good camp. Armin Watts looked good. Braden Fehoko is just a hoss against the run. That's my guy. I like Braden Fehoko a lot. But you have, Montrevious Adams, DeMarvin Leal. Like, Keanu Benton was awesome in the preseason, and he had a good camp too when he was out there. And so, like, all these things are culminating together. And then their edge depth is going to be really good, right? Because Nick Herbig looks like a stud. Like, so I think that's their big takeaway. I think they're going to be a defense that might have issues on the back end. I'm still not fully invested in the slot corner position. I think that could be an
It's actually where I
outside
wanted to go
addition.
next.
Yeah, I think that could be an outside addition. We can talk about that a little bit more. But I think those are your 2 big takeaways. I think they're, in terms of just overall team rather than, individual players looking good. I think there's a willingness on offense to be more explosive. And I think on defense, the front is going to be really deep. And they're going to be able to keep guys like TJ, Cam, Larry, Alex kind of fresh.
If you think about, I mean, for you, obviously, like being a Pitt guy, you will of course remember Matt Canada's time at Pitt when he had a player there, Quadri Henderson. And I just wonder if we could see him try to get the ball to Calvin Austin in similar ways that they did to Quadri at Pitt. I'm not making an excuse at all for Matt Canada. I mean, if people follow me on Twitter, I'm still going to say Twitter like you. They've seen that I've called out Matt Canada plenty of times, in his tenure here in Pittsburgh. But I will also add to that I don't think that he's had the ideal personnel to run his offense either, like his ideal offense. What do you think about that in terms of getting Calvin, not just the ball as a receiver, but also on, jet sweeps, putting him in motion, just getting him the ball in space?
Yeah, he'll most certainly be the Quadri Henderson of this team.
Yeah.
Playing less than Quadri did, but
Yeah.
he'll be a guy that does get those manufactured touches. I just don't know how Matt Canada completely takes his offense and sequences it at an NFL level. I think that's the biggest thing. I think, first of all, the run scheme is fine. I think the scheme itself, and from a run standpoint, that's always been his strong suit. It's always been what makes him intriguing, right? He was the first guy to really kind of engineer motion in the way he did. Like, people forget, I keep telling the people this, but like Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, they all kind of took inspiration from Matt Canada. Like, he was the first one to implement the motion in the way we see it in the modern NFL college game. That was Matt Canada all the way back when he was at like Northern Illinois and NC State. That was his thing, Wisconsin, right? He was the guy that did that. But what has kind of been exposed about him are 2 things as a play caller. I think one is he doesn't really sequence his plays very well, and when he tries to do it, he doesn't get the first step down. And what I mean by that is, in order to sequence off a play, the play actually has to work. Like, if you run a jet sweep, they better work, right? You can't put a passing game off the jet sweep if the jet sweep goes for 2 yards. So I think that is something that they need to be better at, and I think that could open up a new avenue for him. Certainly, because they're going to have a better offensive line. But again, I don't think it's going to be like an elite offensive line. It might be like a top half of the league, but we're talking like 15th best. It's fine, but it's not going to be like some, oh my gosh, elite O line. It'll be definitely better though than the past. So, yeah, he could do some different things there. But I think the other thing is I just don't love his passing game schematics. Like, I don't love how the passing game is engineered from his level. Now, this is not like the JT O'Sullivan rant. I'm sure, you
Mhm.
guys talked about that and how they
Yeah.
call basic stuff. Like, yeah, that's part of it. But a lot of stuff just doesn't work together or work off the rest of the run game. I think that's been the issue. I talked about working a passing game off the jet motion stuff. They don't really have one. I think that's an issue. Like the
Yeah.
jet sweep is just the jet sweep. They don't really have a passing game off that jet sweep, or at least an expansive one. And so I find that to be concerning. I don't love the passing game schematics, and so I kind of wonder if while we're seeing the evolution right now, I'm worried when the season gets going if we're just going to lock back into everything, right? A place of comfort where Pickett's throwing 5 yards per attempt. George Pickens is only running go routes because it's like the only thing they can do to get explosive plays. Deontay Johnson is catching curls and screens and slants and not doing anything else. Like I'm worried there's going to be like a lock in on the passing game. I think the running game is going to be really good. I think they will be. But in order to be a good offense, you have to be explosive in the passing game. I think that's the biggest concern.
Sure. Yeah. And on the reverse side of that, switching sides of the football, with you mentioning that being the biggest concern, I think coming into camp, I looked at the inside linebacker position. I looked at slot corner as the two areas of big concern for me. You address the inside linebacker by bringing in Quan Alexander. Absolutely love that addition. I don't think you can do better than what he's going to give you for the vet men. But I still look at slot corner. I don't think that anybody necessarily like took reign of that job. Like it was there for the taking. It seemed like Shannon Sullivan was kind of like the incumbent guy because he had the most experience there, coming off being that guy in Minnesota last year. Granted, not very good in that role in Minnesota last year, but nobody really challenged him for that spot. Like Elijah Riley seemed to be fine. I think he had made some splash plays. I think he can serve kind of like that off the edge from the slot run defender, like Millette, like Mike Hilton. But I don't know what he's going to give you in coverage. What is your takeaway from the slot corner position?
Yeah, not a lot of confidence there. I agree with your take on Elijah Riley. Had a really good camp, but he's not a 3 down starting slot. He is not that. He is a good special teamer that can play in the slot in a pinch, but he's your Art Mollett. He's your rundown blitzer, which has its role, right? But
Mhm.
Art Mollett wasn't the starting slot either. And so, for that specialized role, I like Elijah Riley. I think they have that part of it. I think the passing down main slot guy. I don't know they have that on the roster. I know Shannon Sullivan's kind of supposed to be that guy, but you look at what he did in camp. But it's not even just what he did in camp. He didn't really have a great camp. First of all, he just kind of looked pedestrian. Allen Robinson, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, all those guys that won the slot, Calvin Austin, kind of just looked on a different level for the most part against him. But like the tape just is not very good from Minnesota last year, and so you got to worry about that. And so I'm worried about Shannon Sullivan as a starting slot if that's what happened. I think the other thing is we just didn't see a lot of Patrick Peterson there. I think people figured, okay, maybe Elijah Riley's the rundown slot. Well, the pass down slot now is going to be Patrick Peterson. And maybe that does end up happening. He just hasn't played a lot there. We've seen it in flashes. Lately, I think it's kind of come up a little bit more. The last 2 days or so of camp, he started to play more in that slot. But before I see live reps of him, the guy hasn't played a single down of football in the slot in his career. I mean, he's a 13-year vet, and I understand why Mike Tomlin would have confidence in him kind of just sliding in there because he has seen it all, right? He's the guy that should be able to quick study, throw it in there, but he has never played that position. And it is a different position. It's a different rule set. It's different in how you play it. And so I need to see Patrick Peterson in that slot role on Saturday. I think that's
Yeah.
a big thing. I need to see him in the slot tomorrow. Like, is there a slot corner problem? I think there might be, but if Patrick Peterson looks good, then there's not. That's your slot corner. And then you have Joey Porter Jr. coming on the field and nickel. Why you want to? That's like the ideal thing because you want your best three corners on the field, and those are your best three corners, right? Joey Porter Jr. has played well enough in camp to earn a spot in those sub packages. It's just if Pat Pete can't play a nickel in the slot, I think you need to think about going out there and getting some guy. And I mean, listen, there's not a lot of good slot corners out there, but Bryce Callahan is like the flashing red light. I think if you look at who
Yeah.
they would go and get, right? That's their Quan Alexander in the slot,
Yep.
but
That's what I was
they
gonna say.
haven't really looked to add a slot corner. So I think Omar Khan's going to give Pat Pete, Shannon Sullivan these 2 games Show what you have here in the slot. We'll see. I think it's easily though their number one kind of worry right now. And by this time next week on Friday after that Falcons game, I think we could be talking about it as either, yep, they got to go make this move, or okay, Pat Pete's the answer.
Yeah, and they did bring in for a visit, but didn't end up signing Corn Elder. And I'm not putting him at the same level as Bright. I would 100% take Callahan over Corn Elder, but I'm just saying that there is a veteran that they brought in for a visit. Maybe they do circle back. Maybe they want to see what this defense looks like in the second preseason game against Buffalo and go from there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Corn Elder's interesting because he is a vet, but he really only has 1 year of significant playing experience in the slot. A lot of his time has been, practice squad stuff. He's very Duke Dawson in that way.
Yeah.
And I think it's a shame Duke Dawson's now on IR for the year in and out because I thought he was having a pretty good camp. Like I think there was a sleeper's chance that Duke Dawson could have really actually made this roster and been like a guy that surprised you as the slot corner. So obviously now that's thrown out the window. Maybe Corn Elder ends up being a guy that they like and can kind of throw in there. It could also be maybe there's a team that needs a position of need, for example. Maybe there's a position, maybe they need D linemen and they have a abundance of slot corners. That's completely possible. And maybe there's a trade that the Steelers can work out to address that. We've talked about that too, where maybe they could trade a D lineman or trade someone like that for a backup center or maybe a slot corner. We'll kind of see.
You mentioned you got to see Patrick Peterson get into the slot some on Saturday for sure. Let's transition to that then. What else are you looking for in this second preseason game against Buffalo? Not to take an answer from you right off the bat, but for me, like the number one thing is the same thing that Derek said yesterday when I asked him about it. Joey Porter Jr. didn't get to play in that first game, so I think he's an obvious answer for everybody. But other than that, what are you looking for in this one?
Yeah, I think the corner room as a whole is a good answer. Like slot corner is we talked about slot corner, right? But let's see how James Pierre bounces back. Like that's an issue too. Like they don't have great outside corner depth after Trice got hurt. I think when we talk about outside ads on the waiver wire, like would it be that surprising if the Steelers add 2 corners? Like not right now from the view. Like they could add a depth.
Yeah.
They could add a slot and they could add a depth outside guy. Like I want to see how he plays. I want to see how Luke Barku plays. I want to see certainly how Joey Porter Jr. reacts to live environments. He's gotten better. I know, George Pickens and him have obviously gone at it, but I want to see him. I don't care what anyone says. I want to see him cover Stephon Diggs. Like I want to see that happen at least one time. If I were Mike Tomlin, I would go out of my way to make sure he goes up against him once. Certainly, I want to see him go against Gabe Davis. Like that is a normal number 2 receiver. Arguably, based on the year Davis had last year, a wide receiver 3 that he should be able to cover. So if he can't cover him, there's issues. Like then you got to rethink the whole thing. But he's a guy that I think you should be very excited for because I think he's going to be pretty good. I think he's going to have a really good debut. I'm not sure it's going to be like Keanu Benton level debut, but I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be a really good debut, and I like Joey Porter Jr. He's catching on quickly and growing. In terms of other things I want to watch, we talk a lot about this kind of mystifying 5th wide receiver spot. Like, who is going to be the 5th wide receiver? No one's really stepped up and taken that job. Like right now, it doesn't feel like anyone wants that job. Gunnar Olszewski's probably been the best of those guys, but doesn't really offer a lot of special teams unless he's going to be your return man, which is possible, I guess. Calvin Austin gets his kind of audition. I think that's something to watch the returners, Calvin Austin, Anthony McFarland, but that goes in tandem with this. If Gunnar Olszewski is your most dependable punt returner, he's going to make the team. That's true. But right now, it's probably Miles Boykin because you got to lean back on, okay, we know this guy's a really good special team. But Des Fitzpatrick has had some flashes, but I mean, everyone's had high hopes for Hakeem Butler, but the lows have been far too frequent. Dropped 2 really bad passes yesterday, and that really summed up his camp. There just hasn't been a lot of guys that have flashed in that room. I've been telling people this, but would not surprise me at all if that is the surprise waiver wire addition they make. If they want to keep 6 receivers, and that's possible that they do want to keep 6. People are discarding that ability. If they want to keep 6 receivers, there are probably not 6 receivers that you would feel comfortable with on a 53-man roster here. and maybe they don't, but I feel like they could easily go out into the waiver wire and try and find a guy that they could like. There are guys out there that are going to be cut from teams that can make a 53-man roster wide receiver. There's a lot of wide receiver talent. So if they want to, they can. But let's see if anyone steps up, right? Let's see if it does Fitzpatrick takes his game to a next level. Let's see if Gunner, let's see if Gunner can maybe make some noise here in this game. Like if he starts to make some noise in game, that's always been my reservation with Gunner Olszewski. Great camp guy, great practice guy. I just have never seen it in a game. And the man has never done it in a game, right? He never did it last year when everyone talked about it around this time. Well, he's going to have a big role. He just doesn't have a big role. And you look at his career, the guy had 8 receptions last year. Like, I don't know how you can really rectify that into saying he's going to have a big role. He has 14 career receptions over 4 years. So we'll see. I think that's something to look at. I think one other big thing I'm just excited to see, and it really is going to be these offensive line combinations. Because yesterday, during their game plan install period, we saw a peak of Broderick Jones at left tackle and Dan Moore at right. I think that is a fascinating thing. I wonder if we get a drive of that. I wonder if we get a drive where you have the 3 starting interior guys, and then you have Moore at right and Jones at left. I think it's not a bad idea to get Broderick Jones first team reps. I just don't think it's a bad idea to let him face a first team defense for 5 snaps for however long. Get Dan Moore in game action at right tackle. I think that needs to happen. If Dan Moore is going to be the swing tackle, he needs game experience at right tackle. He just does. And you really don't need to see Chooks that much. You kind of know who Chooks is. So, I mean, you could pull him a drive early, in my opinion, and put these guys in. So let's see what it looks like. Does Spencer Anderson play at center? I think that's another interesting thing. With Nate Herbig out, that's a possibility he plays with the 3rd team. So I want to see this O-line. I want to see the depth O-line kind of, splinter itself out. I want to see how Spencer Anderson plays. I thought he had a pretty solid debut. I want to see him continue to work on that, because one thing I will say is I think Anderson's starting to make a push to make this roster and becoming a guy that you really think you're going to keep. And if he can make the roster and can play all 5 spots, I think it makes Kevin Dotson a little bit more expendable. A guy that, Nate Herbig has been the top backup this whole time. So if he's one of the top 9 line, like in terms of Kevin Dotson, but if you can trade him, maybe open up a spot, that could be something.
There you go. And I think that's a good segue in terms of the Spencer Anderson aspect of that, because at least within the last couple of days, you're saying you thought he's looked really good. So has any play let's get into some questions here. We got 2 that I wanted to bring up. Has any player jump off the page unexpectedly at camp? A guy no one had on their radar who has opened eyes?
Yeah, man. That's a tough question. Because I don't feel like we've had like a true sleeper to grab onto at camp. So has there been someone that has kind of come out of nowhere and taken the reins of like, oh, this guy could be something? I'll give you an answer for that one. I think it's Trenton Thompson, the safety. Like that has been a guy they signed him mid camp, and he has like 3 interceptions since then.
He had one in the game.
Yeah, he had one in the game too. Like he's making plays. Like he's probably a guy that has come out of nowhere. I don't think anyone had any expectations for a guy that got signed on August 2nd to come in and legitimately push for this team. But he was getting first team reps when some of the injuries were happening. Like he's pretty clearly on the practice squad right now. I think that's pretty clear. The one guy though that I just consistently came back to as, dude, who is this guy coming from? Where is he coming from? Was 100% Dylan Cook. Like this, he's an offensive tackle, former quarterback that played at like NAIA, Montana State Northwest or something. Like a wild story, and he played really well. He's passed LaRaven Clark on the depth chart, played at right tackle with the 2nd team yesterday, some guard as well. Seems to be versatile. He looked really good. I thought he was a guy that legitimately is a player they can rely upon if they got hit with a rash of injuries at tackle and needed to call him up. I feel like he could give them quality reps. And then kind of the last one I want to throw out there, I shouted out earlier, it's been Fehoko, Braden Fehoko, man. He's a massive nose plugger at nose tackle. He's a run stopper first. He eats up double teams like nobody's business. He is a guy that is very specialized with matchups. Like you're probably not going to play him at all against the Bengals. Just not going to play him much. But against the Ravens, against the 49ers, this is a guy that can destroy double teams and combo blocks. And when you have guys like a Landon Roberts and Quan Alexander and Mark Robinson flying behind that guy that can get through unscathed through the B gap, yeah, that's a big advantage. So I think Fajoko's just had a great camp in terms of showing off his strengths of why he should make this roster.
I'm not at all making an excuse for this player here. Obviously, he hasn't been very good. He's no longer on the team, anyways. But man, how much would a player like Devin Bush have appreciated Braden Fajoko? Those guards not being able to climb to the next level. Yeah,
it really could, because that was Bush's biggest weakness all the time, was the fact that he could not shed blocks. He was 5'11", 230-ish, and didn't have great length, and that was always the biggest knock on him, man. If his speed and athleticism could go through unscathed, he could be a real weapon.
I think the last thing that I want to talk here, and let's stick with size, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, talk about some huge humans here to wrap this thing up. Because somebody mentioned, okay, all this talk about Darnell Washington's size, right? Just like a massive human, nicknamed Mount Washington. But like Zach Gentry, you look at the height and weight, he's right there too. Why do we not talk about him in the same way? I mean, the answer, he's not the same level of athlete, obviously, number one, but I just wanted to highlight this comment and bring it up just to get your take on the entire thing.
Yeah, it's you hit it right on the head. Let me just kind of compare for you some of these testing numbers for Darnell Washington. Darnell Washington was 6'7", 264 pounds at the combine. He ran a 4.64, folks. 4.64 at 264, 6'7". Unreal. He had a 4.08 short shuttle. A 4.08 short shuttle. That is 97th percentile for any tight end. Not a 6'7" tight end. Any tight end. He has special athleticism. Zach Gentry, to his credit, is just not a great athlete and has stuck around in the league. I think that says a lot about him. You know, Gentry's probably taller than Darnell Washington, to be quite honest with you. He's 6'8". Darnell's about 6'7". So he's got an inch on him. But Gentry ran a 4.9. His short shuttle was 4.53. His three cone was 7.4. Like, all of these percentiles I'm going to throw out are below 20 percentile. Like, Darnell Washington has one entire testing metric where he is not above average in, and that was his vertical jump. Like, that is it. The guy looks like a basketball player. And I think the other thing with Gentry is he is a lot leaner than Darnell.
Yeah.
Like, Darnell is just built really weird. Like, he's very muscular. Looks like he came out of Georgia. Like, that's what the big thing is. And then there's the third thing, which is just he's the new shiny object. I mean, there's absolutely, you know, he is the new guy that everyone's enamored with. There's something about that, but he's a freak athlete. Like, there is not an athlete like Darnell Washington on the Steelers team right now in terms of what they have in that tight end room. There's not really an athlete like him that's in the NFL. He's a very unique athlete at the tight end position, and so that is why everyone is enamored with him. And it's to no discredit of Zach Gentry. Zach Gentry is a very solid player that gives you good blocking, can be a good pass catcher, and gives you kind of the requisite stuff you need for a backup tight end in this league. Darnell Washington's potential, though, is to be a freak main tight end that does so many different things. And I think his athleticism allows him to be more of a receiver that can bust seams and be used vertically, crossers, corners, posts, different things. So I think that's the big thing between the differences. But certainly, I mean, if you knew Zach Gentry and you saw him, you would also say that is a massive human being.
Yes.
And so, not to discredit Zach Gentry, he's still 6'8" and a very good athlete relative to most 6'8" guys that enter this league, because most 6'8" tight ends don't last very long. But Zach Gentry has lasted longer than most of them, and he's turned himself. If you remember when he came in, man, he was like unplayable when they drafted him.
Yeah.
Now he is a very solid tight end too.
Yeah, and I think he deserves a ton of credit for carving out that role for himself in this league. I think that'll about do it, Nick. Yeah, you can tell the people where they can find you. I can't thank you enough, especially for joining us here on very short notice. So thanks again, and tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah, man, you can find me on Twitter at Farabaugh FB. Obviously, read the stuff at Steelers Now. Make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel. All of that stuff, man. Got to find it, Smitty. I hope I did well with the next man up, mentality. I hope my performance was varsity, if you will.
Who was the running back for the Browns that just like randomly went off, had like 200 yards, 3 touchdowns, like several years ago?
I was like Jerome Harrison, huh?
Yes, that's exact. This was a performance. This is a Jerome Harrison performance from Nick Farabaugh on Steelers Afternoon Drive, which people probably don't want to hear a Browns reference, but that's the first one that came to mind when you're just talking about like just in a short notice going off like that.
Hey, you also brought up another name, Jonas Gray, to my mind. Remember, this guy went for an
New
absurd
England
performance on Sunday Night Football and then just disappeared.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there you go. Browns and Patriots references for the people.
Yeah.
That's what they want to hear on Steelers Afternoon Drive. I am Zachary Smith, PGH. As Nick said, subscribe, like, leave us a comment down below. If you hit that notification bell, you'll get notified when Steelers Afternoon Drive gets posted, any of the practice reports, any of the other great content that we got on the channel. Go check out the site, of course. Make sure you're following us on all social platforms. And if you're listening somewhere that isn't YouTube, you can leave a 5-star review for us as well, and we greatly appreciate that. For Nick Farabaugh, I'm Zachary Smith. Thanks for hopping in and taking another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.